two main paradigms. The first is kind of discriminative functions. Right? So here what we do is that we, in some sense, directly formulate a loss function. Okay, so we first define a hypothesis. Function h, right, of x, and then two, we next define a loss function. And the goal of the loss function is to be able to, in some sense, capture the distance between h of x and y. Okay. And then finally, we try to, once when we say we define the hypothesis function, we define this, essentially this involves some parameters, right? So the hypothesis function typically involves a certain parameterization, right? And we are actually defining this as h theta of x comma y, and then we solve a learning. Okay, so the learning problem involves basically minimizing the sum from I from 1 to capital M, L of h of xi comma theta comma yi. Okay, now the probabilistic learning in the probabilistic learning paradigm, what we do is that we essentially, again, we have a hypothesis function, right? So the hypothesis function is whether this is a linear model or a non-linear model, right? So for example, one example of a hypothesis function is that, you know, h of x is say equal to w transpose x plus b, right? So this is a simple linear model. So it's a simple hypothesis function. So we define a hypothesis function h of x comma theta, right? And since it's a probabilistic perspective, right? What we are trying to do over here is that we define a corresponding probability distribution. Right? So this probability distribution is going to be either a joint probability, like what we saw in the case of naive Bayes, right? Which is P of x, y, comma theta, or it's going to be a conditional probability where we directly try to model P of y given x, comma theta. Okay. So this is what we did in naive Bayes. And this is what we are going to do in logistic regression. Okay. So in the case of naive Bayes, right? In the case of naive Bayes, the parameterization theta was exactly the either the p of y's, right, or the p of xi given y. Right? That's what we directly used as probabilities in the case of discrete naive Bayes. In the case of logistic regression, right, we do not directly try to model p of x comma y comma theta, right, but rather we focus on a conditional distribution p of y given x comma theta, right? And we'll actually look at logistic regression today. So obviously, if you don't understand this, that's fine, right? But I just wanted to give you this high level perspective, right? And now the learning problem is, so we still solve a learning problem, right? But the learning problem is now to try to either maximize the maximum likelihood estimation problem or the MAP problem. Okay. And interestingly, this turns out to be related to something like this, right? So for example, in the case of logistic regression, we will see that when we do the maximum likelihood estimation of the logistic regression, right, we will get something that basically involves solving a learning problem like this. Okay, so this is where both of these are connected, but the approach is very different. In the case of probabilistic learning, we are approaching this from a probabilistic modeling perspective, right? Whereas in the case of discriminative functions, we are approaching this from basically a loss function perspective directly, right? So examples of this is perceptron, right, and SVMs. And obviously examples of this is like Naive Bayes and logistic regression. Right, to some extent even comes in this first class actually, right? Okay, so I just want to give this kind of higher level perspective over here. So any questions on this until now? Okay, so logistic regression, right? So logistic regression, the goal is that we are trying to learn P of y given x directly from data. Okay, so we assume a particular functional form, right? So for example, which basically kind of separates so like suppose like these are the positives and these are I think these are the positives and these are the negatives here in this example, right? So what it means is that the P of y equal to 1 given x has a very high probability here in the class of positives, right? So say these are the positives, right? And these are my negatives. So this is my class 1, right? And this is my class 0, right? So P of y equal to 1 given x is actually 0 over here because I am in my negatives, right? And we want the P of y equal to 1 given x to be 1. Okay. So in some sense, this is like the in the case of the loss function perspective, right? So like when we were in this case, we saw the empirical risk minimization, right? Or we saw the case where we are exactly trying to optimize the 0-1 loss. So in some sense, this probability distribution is exactly like the 0-1 loss, right? Because it assigns a probability of 1 to every positive example, and it assigns a probability of 0 to every negative example, right? And this is like the perfect classifier that we are trying to solve. Unfortunately, this is going to be difficult to learn, right? So in some sense, again, so I'll just explain this a little bit more. So what we mean by a functional form over here is that we have some kind of a hypothesis function, which is h of x comma theta, right? And essentially what this probability distribution is that this is P of y equal to 1 given x is exactly this, right? So this is indicator of h of x theta greater than 0, suppose, right? And so if h of x comma theta is negative, right, then the probability becomes 0. So this would be like this perfect classifier that we are trying to learn over here. And learning this classifier is going to be difficult. Okay. The kind of other issue with this is that, if we could easily kind of overfit over here, right? Particularly if H is a little bit more complicated, right? So it would be a little bit difficult to handle noisy labels essentially, right? Because even if a label is noisy, we are still assigning a probability of 1 or 0 based on the training data. So it actually oftentimes makes sense to apply a more kind of more natural functional form over here. Okay. So this is the case. Okay. So like this is the case where I have my y equal to -1, right? And here y equal to +1, right? So I think did I use 0? No, I think okay. So the classes here are y equal to -1 and y equal to +1. Okay. So the functional form, right? So this functional form that we discussed is kind of unwieldy, right? It's not easy to optimize. We saw this in the case of the 0-1 loss, right? The 0-1 loss is not easy to solve. So the same intuition kind of carries over here as well. That this is not going to be easy to solve. Okay. In fact, interestingly, it turns out that this is actually connected to the 0-1 loss. But anyways, I'll actually not talk about that right now. It's a little bit more kind of advanced, but you can think about this. You can see that if you try to solve the log likelihood of this kind of distribution, right? will end up with something like the 0, 1 loss. But let's leave it right now. Okay. So in some sense, you can think of a logistic regression as an approximation of or actually like a continuous version of the 0, 1 probability distribution. Right. So just like we saw perceptron and we saw SVMs, right? Perceptrons and SVMs were approximation of the 0, 1 loss functions, right? Similarly, logistic regression is an approximation of the 0, 1 probability distribution, right? And the 0, 1 probability distribution looks something like this, right? So it is basically 0 probability over here, and then it kind of jumps to going to 1. Okay, so the green is something like a 0, 1 probability, and this blue line, this kind of blue curve is what the logistic regression is. So it's like a smooth version of this. Okay, so the functional form of a logistic regression is basically something like this. So this is P of y equal to 1 given x is equal to exp raised to w transpose x plus b divided by 1 plus exp raised to w transpose x plus b. And P of minus 1 given x is 1 over 1 plus blah, 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 right? So what this means, you can see that if you add both of these up, right? So P of y equal to minus 1 given x plus P of y equal to plus 1 given x, right? What should this be? Can someone tell me? What should this sum be? 1, right? Why? Why should it be 1? Yeah, so like these are all conditional distributions, right? So we are conditioning on an x. So y can take only plus 1 or minus 1, right? It can just take two values. So the sum of the probability of minus 1 and plus 1 must be equal to 1, right? Because the sum of all the probabilities must kind of add up to 1. Okay, so one kind of form that you can write this in actually, which I actually prefer, I mean, it's not kind of written down over here, but this is a form that I prefer. Okay, so this form is you write P of y given x, okay, irrespective of whether y is equal to plus 1 or minus 1. You write this as 1 plus exp raised to minus y multiplied by w transpose x plus b. Okay, so you can plug this in now. So you see that if y is equal to 1, right, we exactly get this. The reason is because we get minus w transpose x plus b, right? And you can actually kind of divide by w transpose x plus b on both sides, and you will get that the probability of y equal to 1 given x is nothing but 1 over 1 plus exp raised to minus w transpose x plus b, right? When y is equal to plus 1. And when y is equal to minus 1, right, P of y equal to minus 1 given x is nothing but 1 over 1 plus exp raised to minus and minus get cancelled, right? And you get w transpose x plus b. So this is kind of the kind of single functional form that you can write this logistic regression expression as, and it has both the y equal to plus 1 and the y equal to minus 1 case. Okay. Any questions until now? Yeah, so this is how the probability distribution looks like, right? So it's like kind of this higher order sigmoid function. The neat thing about logistic regression is that it actually can be applied to both discrete and continuous features. This is slightly unlike naive Bayes, right? Because in the case of naive Bayes, we are explicitly assuming that we have some discrete, I mean, it is a discrete naive Bayes, right? We are assuming that we have this specific functional form of the parameters, which is the probability of the xi's given y, right? And because it's p of xi given y, we require this discretization of the xi's, right? Because we require the discretization of the xi's, it can be only we have to discretize it into basically a kind of a binning strategy, right? Suppose I have a continuous variable, say x in 0, 1, right? It's a continuous value. To kind of apply this to the naive Bayes, what I need to do is that I first need to discretize this. So I first need to discretize this, right? And then I actually get this into like some kind of a binning. So the standard way of discretizing is that I apply like say, 20, say 10 bins, right? And if I apply 10 bins, then I will get this bin between, you know, 0, comma 0 0.1, comma 0 0.2, comma so on and so forth, right? So it means that if something is between 0 and 0 0.1, then it lies in bin 1. If it's between 0 0.1 and 0 0.2, it lies in bin 2, and so on and so forth, okay? So this is what this is what needs to be done to handle the naive Bayes scenario, right? But in the case of logistic regression, we can directly apply this on the P of y equal to P of y given x, right? So we don't require separately to take essentially a binning or a discretization scenario here, right? I can directly apply W transpose X, whether it's a categorical feature or a continuous feature, right? One thing that typically is done in the case of categorical features is that we do something called one-hot encoding, right? And the reason is because I actually convert my categorical into a continuous feature representation. Okay. The reason for doing this is because if my feature is inherently categorical, right? Suppose my feature is whether it's going to rain or whether it's going to be sunny, right? Obviously, I cannot assign X to be because it's kind of a categorical thing, right? Whether it's raining or whether it's sunny. So the one-hot encoding, what one-hot encoding does is that it converts this into a feature vector of size 2, right? So essentially, suppose this is my feature, right? Then I will kind of create a continuous feature of this, which will basically be 0, 1 in the case when it's sunny, right? Or it will be 1, 0 in the case when it's rainy, right? So I'm converting now my single feature into a two-dimensional one-hot encoding representation. So the same can be done if I have k categories, right? So if my feature can take one of k categories, then I have this representation in what this is called a one-hot encoding. Okay, so I'll just write this down. This is called a one-hot encoding. Okay, so this is how typically things are handled in any kind of machine learning application where you have basically such kind of functional expressions. So same idea, by the way, also applies to the case of SVMs or perceptrons, right? In the case of naive Bayes, you don't need to do this because in the case of naive Bayes, you naturally have categories, right? And naive Bayes really applies to discrete variables. But in any of these models like logistic regression or perceptrons or SVMs, we need to apply this kind of formulation. Okay, are there any questions until now? Don't we use MLE to estimate? Yes, yes. So we'll actually come to that. So we will use maximum likelihood estimation to estimate the W and the B parameters here. So I've not yet spoken about how we learn this, right? So I'm just here talking about logistic regression and the functional form of logistic regression. So we'll come to the learning problem. Okay. So in the two class scenario, right? In the two class scenario, again recall that my probability of p equal to y equal to +1 given x was 1 over 1 plus exp raised to minus w transpose x plus b, right? So essentially, the intuition here is that I can use directly the probabilities, right, to assign a label of 1 or a -1. Okay. So if you recall the way the sigmoid function looks like, it looks like something like this, right? So basically you have like, and this probability is half, by the way, because when W transpose X is equal to, when the W transpose X plus B is equal to 0, right? Then the probability is actually half. So this is the P of Y given X, right? And This is basically y multiplied by w transpose x plus b on this term. Okay, so this probability when this term is zero, when y multiplied by w transpose x plus b is equal to zero, right? You have the probability half. Okay, and this asymptotically kind of goes to one. So this point is one, and similarly this point is zero. Okay, so this side is essentially the point where the probability. Okay, so this is actually this expression is p of y equal to plus one given x. Okay, and similarly, what you can do is you can actually compute the other way around, right? So if you have if you want to do the other way around, it will look something like this, right? So this is p of y equal to minus 1 given x, right? So p of minus 1 given x, let us write this down, right? P of y equal to minus 1 given x is 1 plus 1 over exp raised to w transpose x plus b. Okay, so as w transpose x plus b becomes minus infinity, right? This denominator goes to 0, right? So the probability becomes 1. And as W transpose X becomes positive infinity, right? The denominator goes to infinity, right? And this probability becomes 0, right? So this looks like the green line over here. And the red line is P of y equal to plus 1 given x. This becomes 0 as W transpose X plus B becomes minus infinity, right? Because you have a minus minus gets cancelled. And then conversely on this side, this becomes 1, okay? So you can see that in this part, right? In this part, the probability of y equal to plus 1 given x is larger than the probability of y equal to minus 1 given x, right? That's why this is the positive portion. Similarly, in this part, the green line is higher than the red line, right? The green curve is higher than the red curve, right? And that's why in this part, you have that the probability of y equal to minus 1 given x is larger than the probability of y equal to plus 1 given x, right? So that's why this portion comprises of the negatives and this portion comprises of the positives. Okay. So what essentially this is equivalent to, okay, is that this is equivalent to the negative case, right, as essentially classifying as a negative one if W transpose X plus B is less than 0, right? So this is the negative. So sorry, actually I flipped so this is the negative region, right? And I just try to see, is there a red color here? And this is this region, right? So W transpose X plus B is greater than 0, then I have this region where the red curve is above the green curve. Okay. Okay. Is this clear to everyone? Okay. So the learning problem, right? What's the learning problem? So learning problem is basically is exactly the conditional likelihood. So this is actually called maximum conditional likelihood estimation. Okay. I mean, you can loosely still call it maximum likelihood estimation, but actually what we are maximizing here is not the joint distribution between y comma x, okay, but it is the conditional distribution of p of y given x comma w comma b, okay. So this is one important difference. But you can do the same thing, right? So I have my data. So my learning problem, okay. So my learning problem is I have my data set, right? So my data set comprises of x1, y1 until x capital M, y capital M, right? So just use curly brackets, okay? Actually, in this case, I think I'll replace this with capital M, right? So I have x1, y1 until x capital M, y capital M. And essentially what I'm doing is, again, I have the same IID assumption, right? So each of my xi, yi's are IID, right? So they are independent and they are identically distributed. So the probability over the data, right? So the conditional probability of P of YD given X data, right, is xd given theta, right? So theta here is w comma b. Okay. So this is nothing but actually this term over here, right? Which is the product of I from 1 to capital M, P of yi given xi comma w comma b. Okay. Yeah, so this is not exactly the same as what we use for Naive Bayes. For Naive Bayes, we maximize the log likelihood, right? Here we are looking at a conditional likelihood because we are really defining the logistic regression as a conditional probability distribution and not a joint distribution like what was done in the Naive Bayes case. Okay, so that's one kind of fundamental difference. So this looks at the difference between generative learning and discriminative learning. Okay. So Naive Bayes is a canonical example of generative learning, and logistic regression is kind of a canonical example of discriminative learning, right? So a generative classifier directly tries to model P of x comma y, which is a joint distribution. Okay. And a discriminative model assumes that you have some functional form or you try to model P of y given x. So you don't really care about P of x, really, right? You only try to model directly the thing that we are trying to use for, for estimation, which is the P of y given x. Okay, so you can ignore the P of x. Okay. And the intuition here of generative classifiers is that it assumes some functional form of P of x given y and P of y. Okay, and it uses the Bayes rule to essentially say that P of x comma y is P of x given y multiplied by P of y, and then you sum over the y's. Okay. So this so this is the kind of main idea with generative classifiers, right? And then you have some parameterization of P of x given y, right, and P of y, right? So in the case of Naive Bayes, in the case of discrete Naive Bayes, we assume that our parameters were exactly the individual conditional distributions, right? So we assume that the parameters here were P of xi given y, okay, for different xi's and different y's. And then similarly, the thetas here were the p of y's, right? And then we essentially estimate these parameters directly from the training data, and then use maximum likelihood, and then we can get the learning problem, okay. And finally, we need to use P of y given x for inference, right? So when we use P of y given x for inference, we know that P of y given x is nothing but, P of x given y divided by P of x, right? So we use the Bayes rule, and since we are kind of directly modeling P of x comma y, right? And we are doing this by basically doing P of x given y multiplied by P of y. We can do something like this, right? So this is the Bayes rule. We use this, and then we can calculate the conditional distribution P of y given x. Okay. Yeah. So so finally, since we care about P of y given x for inference, it's a little bit of an indirect computation, right? Using the generative model, and the reason is because we are also in some sense we are also trying to model P of x, right? So essentially, if we have P of, if we have P of y's, right, and we have P of x given y, we can actually sample and we can get a distribution of P of x. So what's happening in the case of generative models is that we are essentially using some of the energy of the model, right, to try to figure out the conditional distribution P of y given x, but also figure out the distribution of P of x. Okay. So the application of this is that if we were to use a generative model, we can actually generate data with this model, right? So we can actually generate features as P of x, right? So basically imagine that you want to generate images, right? And like a lot of this is actually done today in things like generative adversarial models. Unfortunately, we won't be looking at any of this in this class, slightly advanced topic, right? But a lot of kind of things in deep learning have been moving towards generative learning because you can actually generate data through this. Okay, but if your goal is not not to generate data, but your goal is really a classification problem, right? It might be a little bit of an overkill with a generative model because, as I said, we are focusing some of our effort on P of y given x and also P of x. Okay. On the other hand, a discriminative classifier, like what logistic regression does, it directly tries to model P of y given x. Okay, so it doesn't care about what P of x is. So it assumes that you have some kind of a functional form of P of y given x, and it tries to directly learn the parameters of P of y given x comma theta. Okay, so you directly learn P of y given x, and unfortunately, because you are only focusing on this, you cannot really try to get P of x. Okay? So what that means is that you cannot use this for generating data. If your application requires a generative component where you want to generate some samples, you cannot do that with a discriminative classifier. Okay, so let's look a little bit at the learning problem, right? So what is the expression for learning? So actually, let me just derive this, from scratch. So assume over here that the data set is comprises of, so I'll do this in a slightly different form that was there in the slides previously, just so that you can see this form as well. Okay. So this is my training data set comprising of x1, y1 until xm, y1, right? And then we saw that we are looking at this case, which is p of yd given xd comma theta, right? And this is nothing but product of I from 1 to m, p of yi given xi comma theta, okay? And this expression is nothing but the product of I from 1 to m, 1 over 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus p. Okay. Now what we do is that when we do log, right, we apply the log on both sides. So the log of p of yd given xd comma theta, right? And here, by the way, theta is nothing but w comma b. Okay. So this term is actually now we get a sum of log of 1 over 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus p. Okay. And now we can look at the conditional maximum likelihood estimation problem, right? As essentially trying to maximize log of p of yd given xd comma theta over theta, right? And this becomes nothing but maximizing w comma b, right? And I have this term over here, right? So this is essentially 1 over 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus b. And you can actually kind of simplify this as saying that this is negative of sum of I from 1 to m, right? Log of 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus p. Okay. So in some sense, this problem is equivalent to minimizing w comma b of sum of I from 1 to m log of 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus b. Yeah. So this is the final expression that we get, right? So this term is slightly different from this, right? But you can actually substitute the values of y equal to minus 1 and plus 1 over here. Okay, so your training data is either plus 1 or minus 1, right? You substitute the values back over here and you will see that you will actually exactly get this expression. Because it's slightly easier to derive, but I think both the derivations are the same. The functional forms are slightly different. Okay. Any questions until now? So let's look at the optimization problem now. Right. So the optimization problem is minimize w comma b. Okay. Sum of I from 1 to capital M. I have log of 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus p. Okay. So this expression actually turns out to be a convex minimization problem. Right. So reason why it's convex is because this functional form is what is known as a log sum exp. Okay, so it's a log followed by a sum of exponential, because this one can be written as exp raised to 0, right? And this is exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus b, right? So because of this, this function turns out to be convex. You can also actually look at this from first principle. So you can, for example, take the double derivative of this or the Hessian of this, prove that it is greater than or equal to 0, or just show that the gradient is increasing function, so on and so forth, right? So you can basically prove this in various ways that this function is convex, but I won't prove it right now, but this turns out to be a convex optimization problem, right? So what this means is that we can actually optimize this using gradient descent. Okay, so we have the minimum of w comma b. Okay, so now we'll talk about gradient descent briefly. Okay, so what we need to do is that if this term, right, you define this term to be L of w comma b. Okay, so basically this term over here. Okay, you define this term to be L of w comma b. Then we care about the gradients of with respect to w of L of w comma b, right? So this gradient is actually pretty straightforward because you have a sum over here first of all, right? So we'll have the sum again, sum of I from 1 to capital M, right? And then we have the log of something like that, right? So what's the derivative of log? So this is log of x, right? So we apply the chain rule basically, right? So applying the chain rule, we take the derivative first of this expression, right? So we take the derivative of this function log of this term, right? So let's suppose we call this stuff, right? As Nathan is saying, call this stuff. Then this is basically one over the this particular term, right? So there's a derivative of log of this term with respect to this term. Okay? So we get basically first 1 over 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus b, right? Okay. And then we want to take the derivative of the term inside, right? So we have 1 plus exp raised to this term. So now what's the derivative of this? So obviously 1 gets cancelled, the derivative of 1 is 0, right? Then we have a derivative of exp raised to minus yi multiplied w transpose xi plus b. Okay. So derivative of exp with respect to the terms inside is going to be nothing but exp, right? So I will have exp of minus yi multiplied by w transpose. Sorry, just give me 1 minute. Just get rid of this, right? So this is exp raised to w transpose xi plus b, right? Multiplied by again the term which is inside. So I have a negative sign because it's minus, right? Multiplied by yi followed by xi. Okay, so I think I'll kind of remove this term. So this is basically this ratio multiplied by yi multiplied by xi. Okay, so this is the derivative with respect to w of this term. And similarly, you can compute the derivative with respect to b. Okay, so this is the gradient of this term with respect to b of L of w comma b. This is going to be very similarly, right? So I'll just write down the final expression. This is exp raised to minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus b. Okay, followed by 1 plus exp raised to minus yi. Okay, here I just have a yi, so there's no xi, right? Because I just take the derivative with respect to the bias term. So yeah, so this is the derivatives with respect to w comma b. Okay, and then what we can do is okay. So actually, one thing I forgot to tell you, right, is that unfortunately there's no closed form solution here. Okay, so I have this gradients. You could try setting the gradient to 0, right? But unfortunately, you have a sum of terms over here, and you will actually not get any closed form for this, right? So you will not be able to get the derivatives to be equal to 0 and try to get a closed form. It won't work out, right? So this is very similar to SVM. You have to solve it using an optimization. Okay, so this is exactly, I mean, here kind of computed the gradient. This is again a slightly different form, but I think you can actually kind of check this out that both forms are exactly the same. Okay, and the gradient descent would be essentially very simple, right? So the gradient descent, would be the idea of the algorithm is very simple. Okay, so what I do is that I start with some arbitrary initialization. For example, 0, right? You could start with 0. And then what I do is that for epochs from 1 to t, I assume that I have a learning rate alpha equal to the learning rate. Okay. What I do is that I set wt plus 1 to be equal to wt. So actually say I start with 0, right? So this is wt minus alpha multiplied by gradient with respect to w of L of w comma b evaluated at w equal to wt. Okay. Similarly, I do b of t plus 1 equal to b of t minus gradient with respect to b of L of w comma b evaluated at b equal to bt. Okay. So actually here what you do is that when you are computing the gradient, you will evaluate this with respect to w equal to wt and b equal to bt, right? And similarly, you will evaluate this with respect to b equal to bt and w equal to wt. Okay. And then essentially you will end. That's it. So typically you will have like some kind of a convergence criteria, like you will say something like that L of wt plus 1 comma bt plus 1, minus if the absolute value of this, right, is less than epsilon. Okay, then you end. Okay, otherwise you just continue. So I think this is actually inside the for loop. So sorry. Yeah. Right, and then something like this, right? So this is going to be the main pseudocode of the gradient descent, and it's basically very similar to what we saw in the case of linear regression. Perceptrons, the idea is very similar, just the form of the gradients is different. Okay. Okay. So any questions until now? Okay. So the we can also do a prior distribution over here. Okay. And the prior distribution now is a prior distribution on the weights, right? Basically the weights and the bias. So one form of a prior distribution is to have a distribution, a prior distribution on essentially the weights, but assume that the weights have a zero mean, for example, right? And they have a variance of 2 sigma square. So this is one kind of simple form of a prior distribution, and you have a very simple identity covariance, right? So exactly the prior distribution is just a product of j 1 over square root 2 pi sigma square exp raised to minus wj square over 2 sigma square. Okay, So in general, you can have this as an n-dimensional Gaussian, right? But for simplicity right now, just assume that you have like identity covariance, okay? So it's just minus wj square and just a product of these. So each dimensionality, I mean, each dimension is independent of each other. So what this tries to do is that this actually pushes the parameters close to zero, okay? But if you remember, there was one more notion that was doing something very similar, right? And this notion is the notion of regularization. So we saw regularization earlier. And what regularization does is that it tries to avoid large weights. It tries to make the parameters close to zero. So what is very interesting is that this very natural choice of a prior actually does something very similar to regularization. Okay. So what you basically do is that you assume that you have some kind of a prior like this. Okay, so you have product of I from 1 to n, p of yi given xi comma w comma b, right? Multiplied by a prior of w multiplied by a prior of b, right? So you assume a very similar prior for b as well. And then what we'll get is that we will get actually a term that has this sum. So this was the likelihood that we saw, right? So this was the conditional likelihood. And then we have this additional term which looks like this, right? And also actually you have like minus 2 like b square, okay? But typically what also is done in practice, by the way, this is what I did for one of the homework questions, is that the bias and the weights are sometimes clubbed together and you just add one more dimension to your features as a constant feature, like a 1 or something, right? So that's the way you don't have to actually have a b everywhere. You can just mathematically assume that it's there in the w. Okay, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. But now the optimization problem becomes like minimum of w comma b. This is the loss function that we had earlier, right? L of w comma b. But additionally, I have this plus lambda by 2 w square plus lambda by 2 b square. Okay, so this is the additional regularization that comes naturally from this prior. Okay, and the reason why, so by the way, I have a negative sign over here, okay, but when I so like this is the likelihood, right, and I'm trying to maximize this. So when I'm trying to maximize this likelihood, when you convert it into a minimization problem, right, the negative becomes a positive. So I get plus lambda by 2 w square plus lambda by 2 b square. Okay, any questions on this? Yeah, so this term actually, okay, so this term is also called the L2 regularization. Okay, and there's actually one more notion of regularization. So I'll just talk a little bit about regularization. Okay, but by the way, before talking about regularization, I'll just um, to just talk about. Okay, so actually, before talking about regularization, I'll just talk about the loss function perspective. Okay. So in the case of perceptrons, right? So if you remember perceptrons, the loss function perspective of perceptrons is that you have this L of W comma B, right, as essentially this term, right? So it's okay, so maybe I'll just take one, like I'll just take the ith example for this for xi comma y, right? So this term is nothing but max of 0 comma minus yi multiplied by w transpose xi plus b. Okay, and SVMs was where I have, so this is perceptron, this is SVM of w comma b. This is very similar, just that I have a 1 minus here, right? So I have 1 minus yi of w transpose xi plus b. Okay, so this is the perceptron loss, this is the hinge loss. Okay, and now we can look at logistic regression in a very similar manner, right? So logistic regression of W comma B, right, is exactly now where I have this log of 1 plus exp raised to minus yi multiplied by W transpose xi plus B. Okay. So this is related to homework 1 as well, right? So essentially, in the case of classification, right? So again, this is all the case of classification, right? The classification, what we want is that if yi multiplied by W transpose xi plus p, okay, if this term is greater than 0, right, that means that both y and W transpose x plus b are in the same, basically the same sign, right, then this is good, right? So what this means is that the loss should be low, right? And conversely, if yi multiplied by W transpose xi plus b is less than 0, that means my y and W transpose x plus b are actually of opposite signs, right? That means that this is bad, right? And that means that the loss should be high. So all of these loss functions are very intuitive. What you can do is assume that you basically define a new variable called z to be y multiplied by W transpose x plus b. Okay. Then mathematically you can view the perceptron loss, right, as max of 0 comma minus z, right? So what happens is that if z is negative, then this quantity will be high, right? High if z is negative, okay? Or actually at least it's positive, right? So maybe I'll say that this is high if like z is much lesser than 0, okay? Similarly, in the case of SVMs, right, we have like max of 0 comma 1 minus z. So again, we have the same intuition, right? And logistic regression, the loss function is log of 1 plus exp raised to minus z, right? This also has the same intuition, by the way. So when z is negative, exp raised to minus z will be positive, right? And log of that will also be positive. So higher the value of z, the higher the value of z is, the larger will be the loss. Okay. So intuitively, you can view actually all of these from loss function perspectives, and they are essentially doing the same thing. Okay. So let me just pull up one particular thing. Just give me 1 minute. Uh, just so I'll just pull this up. Just compare different loss functions. Okay, yeah. So this might be okay, right? This might do the job. So it's so if you see this, okay. So this is loss functions for machine learning. So look at this. This is the 0 1 loss. Okay, the black curve is the I mean this is a 0 1 loss, right? So basically what this means is that this is y multiplied by f of x. F of x in our case is W transpose x plus b. Okay. So if this term is negative, then we want this to have a loss of 1. Okay. And conversely, if it's 0, then we want this to have a loss of 0. I mean, sorry, if y multiplied by f of x is positive, then we want this to have a loss of 0. Okay, so this is the ideal case scenario, but obviously hard to optimize. All of these are relaxations, okay? So this green line is the hinge loss, right? So this is the hinge loss, and this one is essentially, is this term, this max of 0, comma 1 minus y multiplied by f, right? So this goes linearly as 1 minus y becomes negative, right? And as y becomes larger than 1, this becomes 0. Y multiplied by f becomes larger than 1, this becomes 0, okay? And the red one is actually the logistic regression loss, right? So this is log of 1 plus exp raised to minus y multiplied by f. So this is the red. So you see that this also has the same intuition, that it basically becomes positive when y is negative, and as y becomes 0, it becomes closer and closer to 0, right? I mean, as this becomes positive, it becomes closer and closer to 0. And conversely, this is the exponential loss. So exponential loss also is the same intuition. So anyways, I just wanted to very quickly point out this kind of connection over here, that you can view this from a loss function, can view all of this from a loss function perspective as well. Okay. Anyways, so let us talk a little bit about regularization. Okay. So essentially within regularization, there are two kinds of regularization. Okay. So the first kind is okay. So without regularization, right? The optimization problem is just this, which is minimum of w comma b, L of w comma b, right? Sorry. I from 1 to n, L of xi comma yi comma w comma p, right? So these are my parameters theta. Okay. And now I can actually do two kinds of regularization. So this is L2 regularization, right? And what happens here is that I do min of w comma b, I do I from 1 to n, L of xi comma yi comma wb plus lambda by 2 w square plus lambda by 2b square. Okay. So here I'm actually using the squared L2 distance as my regularization. Okay. There is one more kind of regularization called L1 regularization, right? And what L1 does is that you basically have the same term, which is min of w comma b. Okay. Sum of I from 1 to n, L of xi comma yi comma w comma b plus lambda um, plus lambda, and this is like the one norm of w, right? Plus lambda absolute value of b. Okay. So the one norm essentially, right? So the one norm of w, if you remember, is nothing but the sum of the absolute values, right? So this is a dimensionality of the absolute value of wi. So that's the difference between L1 and L2 regularization. And essentially what L1 tries to do is that um, we are kind of adding um, absolute value here of W. Okay. So intuitively the difference between, okay. So maybe does someone want to just like at a high level, right? Tell me what might be a difference between the L1 and the L2 regularization in terms of the obtained solution W. What will L1 try to do and why? Any idea? Okay. So have you guys heard of sparsity? Yeah, so they both do it slightly differently. So what is the difference between the two?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking this way because the L2 shrink like the weights by the same proportion,
Okay.
and the L1 can shrink some coefficients to zero, something like that.
Yeah, so it tries to put some of the coefficients to
To
zero.
zero.
Why does it do that? Any idea of why it will do that? Yeah, so the intuition is correct, right? So the intuition is correct. So L1, okay. So L2 regularization, right? L2 regularization just tries to get the weights to be as low as possible. Okay. But L1 regularization additionally tries to make some of the weights to be zero. Okay. And one way you can think about this as follows. Okay. So look at the L1 norm. Okay, so the L1 norm is essentially I from 1 to D of Wi square. So what intuitively will happen is that if some of these weights are very large, right? If some of these weights are very large, then in some sense what the square distance is doing is that it is penalizing it a lot. Okay, so imagine that my W values are distributed like this, right? So I have 0 and then I have all of these different values of W. So if I have a few weights which are like concentrated over here, right, and I have a few weights which are concentrated, which are large, right? This will not be as good a solution for L1, I mean for L2, because there is a square penalty over here, right? There's a square penalty. These points would actually have a very large um, uh, component, right? So imagine, for example, if there is an outlier over here, like one weight basically is this value, right? This would be heavily kind of penalizing the L2 distance. So the L2 distance would be very large for this component. So what the L2 distance rather tries to do is that the L2 distance would rather try to actually concentrate all of its points close to zero, right, as much as possible, but not necessarily set it to be exactly zero. But conversely, what the L1 actually does is that L1 it is still not as much penalized, right? So the L1 distance is basically, as I said, equal to the sum of I from 1 to D of the absolute value of Wi, right? So because that is the absolute value, it is fine if um, some of the components are actually close by over here, and it's fine if some components are a little far. Obviously, you don't want it to be too far, but maybe a scenario like this would be fine with with L1. Okay? So intuitively, what L1 does is that it tries to kind of increase the concentration of those of the weights that are close to zero, and then you would have some non-zero weights over here, something like this, right? But what L2 would try to do is that it would concentrate all the mass of the weights somewhere around this point. Okay, so this is essentially the difference between L1 and L2 regularization. And in fact, what it turns out is that there are actually algorithms for minimizing the L1 that can explicitly enforce for sparsity. So there is a slightly more complicated explanation of why L1 minimizes sparsity, and it turns out that this is because L1 is actually related to what is known as the number of non-zero values in W. Okay, so this number of non-zero values in W, this is called the L0 regularization. This is non-convex. Okay, but it turns out that L1 loss is a convex relaxation of the L0 regularization. Okay, so because of that reason, it's slightly more complicated, but there is also explanation of why L1 regularization will try to okay, so maybe like L1 will do something like this, right? So basically That's the reason why L1 will try to concentrate a lot of points close to 0. And essentially L2 would not mind spreading this out, over a distance, but it's not so essentially L2 does not necessarily get the points exactly close to 0, right? But L2 will try to get it like it will not be exactly 0, but still will be close to 0. So like you will not have these outlier points in L2. So that's the main difference between L1 and L2. Okay. Yeah, so this is another way of viewing. Yeah, is it possible to use both at the same time? So actually that's a good question. And in fact, there are regularization schemes. They are called L12 regularization. So what you can do is you can actually cluster your weights. Suppose you have some kind of a natural clustering, right? So you have your, suppose like these are your set of weights W, and you can actually cluster your weights into, basically cluster 1, cluster 2, and cluster 3, right? And apply L1 regularization, or sorry, maybe apply L2 on each of the cluster, but but across these, right? Across these you have L1. So what will happen is that you will have, like, say something like this, right? So you will have your regularization to look like this, which is I from 1 to 3. It's a sum, right? And then it's a sum of J in Ci of Wj square. Okay. So this inside is a L2, right? But outside this is like a L1 because it's like a sum across these clusters. So this is called a L12 regularization, and this is what is oftentimes used in practice as well. You can actually combine both that way. Yeah, so this is one more figurative description of L2 regularization, right? So what happens is that this is your loss function. Okay, so this is my L of W. Okay. And in some sense, what you're doing is that you're adding this function, which is the L1, right? So L1 is the absolute distance. So this particular function is like the absolute, uh, basically L1 of W, right? So this is the sum of W1 plus W2, right? Whereas L2 is more like a ball, okay? So in some sense, this is another explanation of why L1 gets some sparsity, is because in some sense, this is like a combination of a squared, a loss function which looks like this, right? And a regularization that looks like this. Yeah, so the solutions will tend to be more on, one of the axes where one of the weights will be 0. Or on the other hand, with the L2, the solution will probably be more aligned over here. Okay, so I think we are almost out of time, but I'll quickly end with this. There is one interesting connection between naive Bayes and logistic regression. Okay, and this is actually a very nice paper, very old paper by Andrew Ng and Mike Jordan in 2002. Okay, so they did some analysis for naive Bayes and logistic regression, right? And what they found is that in the case of naive Bayes, okay, um, so the naive Bayes requires more like order log n number of samples. Okay, so essentially what it means is that the naive Bayes converges quickly to its asymptomatic estimates quickly with less amount of data. So naive Bayes does not require as much amount of data. Okay, but oftentimes it could converge to a uh, slightly more biased or a slightly less helpful solution. Okay, and the main reason is because the naive Bayes makes this conditional, independence assumption. Um, yeah. So Gaussian naive Bayes means naive Bayes. Okay, yeah. So Gaussian naive Bayes is actually slightly different. We didn't really cover this in class as much. So Gaussian naive Bayes actually, so basically what we covered in class was the discrete naive Bayes. The Gaussian naive Bayes is actually a case where you model P of y as a Gaussian, right? So this is a Gaussian of mu y comma sigma y. And you also model P of xi given y as a Gaussian. of P of X I y comma sigma I y. Okay. So what it means is that you actually have Gaussian distributions for P of y and P of xi given y, and you can also learn now the parameters mu y and sigma y. It's slightly more complicated, but still can be done. So the advantage of a Gaussian line base is that you can actually make you can actually model continuous as opposed to a discrete kind of naive base. You can actually model continuous values more naturally. But of course, the thing is that you still have conditional independence assumption, right? And you're also making one very important assumption that your P of y and your P of x given y are actually Gaussian. So this analysis was done for a Gaussian distribution, but I think the same kind of applies for general, for the discrete case as well. Okay. It turns out that the logistic regression actually requires order n number of samples. So logistic regression converges slightly slowly, okay, but it does not require an independence assumption, and oftentimes, it can actually perform much better. So this was an example of a kind of naive Bayes versus logistic regression in practice, right? So this is M here is the number of samples. Okay, so the solid line is naive Bayes, right? So this is naive Bayes, and this is logistic regression, right? So for few of these data sets like this and this, these are continuous data sets. So in these continuous data sets, we see that a logistic regression actually performs much better. And particularly over here, right, we see the logistic regression actually is much better than naive Bayes. So here it means a naive Bayes assumption is probably not a good idea. And again, I think one more thing is that in continuous data sets, oftentimes naive Bayes does not perform well. But in many of these data sets, which are discrete data sets, naive Bayes actually performs decently. So you see over here, actually naive Bayes performs pretty good. Logistic regression, in fact, is much lower. So I think if you give more number of samples, finally it will come to the naive Bayes, right? Just that logistic regression actually requires more number of samples to really estimate the parameters well, as compared to naive Bayes. So the takeaway is, I think one kind of loose takeaway is as follows. Naive Bayes actually will converge quickly with less amount of data. Okay, but it may not converge to a very good solution, right? And logistic regression in general will actually converge to a good solution if you compare it to a naive Bayes. Unfortunately, it could require actually much more amount of data. So I think this is the high level trade-off between logistic regression and naive Bayes. Okay, and coming to multi-class logistic regression, right? It turns out you can actually kind of extend this to multiple classes. So here in this case, there are different classes. And the only difference is that you have your distribution to be exp divided by sum of exp. So this is the probability. Okay. And it's actually very similar to the 0-1 case, except that now you have parameters for each class, right? And then finally you want all of your probabilities to sum up to 1. Okay, so I think with this we'll actually end this logistic regression class.